At the end of the last class, we were talking a little bit about flow. And flow is this state that you get into when you're doing something that you really, really enjoy. It's something that you enjoy, you do very well. And what I was suggesting is that you try to find jobs or things that you do very well and try to make a living with that. Alright, so one of the final things I want to talk about is when giving up is good. So, when is it good to give up? We're talking about happiness, right? And when people have hope, they're often happy. So when is it a good idea to give up hope? When can hope actually make you less happy?
When persistence does not produce any positive consequences.
When what doesn't produce positive consequences?
When persistence, when continuing to do that thing.
Yeah, so when persisting to do something doesn't produce any positive consequences, then this is a situation in which giving up might be a good idea. So chronically ill patients often can be happier if they give up hope. So chronically ill patients, this is a patient with a particular disability or disease where they're not going to get any better. And if they're constantly hoping that they're going to get better and they're focusing on how good it's going to be when they're better, they're not focusing on the good things that they could have right now instead. So it's hard to flow if you're constantly thinking about something that's going to happen in the future. If you're thinking about how good your life is going to be when you get out of college, it's going to be hard for you to enjoy college and perform well in college. Alright, so in order to make happiness permanent, Martin Seligman, who is a positive psychologist, we're going to talk more about positive psychology today, he said if you want to be happy, you should do things that produce pleasure. Do things that make you feel good. But it's not just doing things that make you feel good. It's also doing things that engage you. Doing things that you find yourself absorbed in, that you're flowing in. Do things where you're making relationships with other people. So Facebook is good for this, although the quality of the relationship might be questionable. You're building and you're maintaining relationships with other people. Also, you should do things that give your life meaning and give you a sense of accomplishment. So, the final thing I want to talk about with happiness is the facial feedback hypothesis. So what's the idea with facial feedback?
If you show people that you are pleased with them, you are satisfied, you're happy, when I look at you and I'm smiling, it's like good. Even if I'm not actually, but
So yeah, it has to do with this smiling even if you're not happy. So the idea is that outward expressions of emotion intensify the emotion. Outward expressions of emotion actually influence how you feel. So to do this, there's this really ingenious experiment. They had people hold a pen while they read comics. And then they were supposed to judge how funny the comics were. Right? So on a scale of 1 to 5, how funny is this comic? So in one group, they had people hold the pen with their lips. So you hold the pen with your lips like, this is a big pen. Okay. Or the other group held the pen with their teeth, like this. So which face is more like a smile? This one, yeah. You have to pull your whatever teeth are, not teeth, you have to pull them back, and you make this sort of a smiley face. And very interestingly, the people that were holding the pens with their teeth were rating things as more funny. So it appeared as if they were happier and were enjoying things more. So this suggests if you force yourself to smile, you can actually increase your happiness. So if you're feeling bad, put on a happy face. Now this doesn't mean that if you have someone who's depressed, if you force them to smile, that they're all of a sudden not going to be depressed or anything, but it can make people feel a little bit better. Interestingly, another experiment, they took Botox. You guys know what Botox is? So Botox is often used by celebrities. They inject it into their foreheads so they can't wrinkle their forehead so they don't get wrinkles, right? This is an anti-aging treatment. So some scientists injected Botox into the muscles that people use when they frown. And then they showed them pictures of things that would make people like upset, disgusted, angry. And they had the people inside of an fMRI, so they were measuring brain activity. And when people had these paralyzed muscles for frowning, they showed less strong responses to these stimuli that should produce normally frowns. Ugh. Okay, so let's talk about positive psychology. So what is positive psychology? Yeah.
You mentioned something about the previous slide was about the relationship. How about for people who are like introverted? Is this still correct for them?
So, okay, I'm not an expert with the different personality types, but even with the introverted people that I know, like they usually have friends. They don't go out and they're not as social as the extroverts, but they still have friends, they still have social relationships. There's some people who like basically go away from everyone else and live on their own. So maybe for those people this wouldn't work. Actually, maybe that would make them happier. I don't know. You can test that experimentally. Get some introverts, force them to participate in some social activities versus not. Then the easy way to do this would be to give maybe people who are unable to get out of their homes, so invalids or older adults who can't drive anymore and they can't get out, give them computers. And you could have some people have computers with Facebook installed on it, and some computers where Facebook isn't installed on it. So both of them have the computers, right? So you have a control group. But then you have one group that can make social relationships. And you can then see if that makes them feel happier. All right. So what is positive psychology? A study of how people can be what? Happier. Anything more? More effective? Anything else? I would argue that's definitely a part of it. So this statement from Seligman, I mentioned that he was a positive psychologist. He says it's a science of positive subjective experience, positive individual traits, and positive institutions promises to improve quality of life and prevent the pathologies that arise when life is barren and meaningless. So recently we had a speaker who was talking about chess as a method of logotherapy, and he said that something that was really important is meaning. And you needed meaning in your life, and without meaning, then you would suffer from all of these maladies. So positive psychology is about giving people meaning, helping them be happier, helping them to be more effective. They discuss such issues as what enables happiness, the effects of autonomy and self-regulation, how optimism and hope affect health, what constitutes wisdom, how talent and creativity come to fruition. And finally, a science and profession that will come to understand and build the factors that allow individuals, communities, and societies to flourish. So if you remember way back to the beginning of the semester, we talked about the purposes of science and psychology, and the last one was about improving life. So this is really the focus of positive psychology, to make life as good as it can be. Before positive psychology, there was often a focus much more on the negative. So with clinical psychology, it was how do you make people normal when they have some problem? So they're depressed. How do you get them back to normal? Not being depressed, right? It wasn't a focus on how to make everyone as good as they could be, but how to get the people that were suffering back to a level where they're not suffering. So this is more applicable to everyone. So one of the things that it said was it's focused on autonomy. What is autonomy? If you're autonomous, what does that mean? Independent, okay. Anything else? You can choose what to do. Autonomy is the right to self-govern. You can choose what to do. Self-directed freedom. So freedom to what? Freedom to control your actions. Freedom to control your surroundings. So I am fairly autonomous in this classroom, right? If there are people talking during the quiz, what can I do? Tell them to get out. I can have people turn on the lights, right? So I have autonomy, some autonomy in the classroom. You guys have some autonomy in here too, but not as much as I do. This freedom to control your actions and also freedom to control your surroundings is also related to self-efficacy, which we'll be talking about in more detail in a little bit. Think back to our discussion about kids. How is autonomy related to self-esteem? How is this related to attachment?
It increases the first one.
So if you are more autonomous, you should have more self-esteem. Would everyone argue that? If you have more ability to control your actions and control your surroundings, you should feel better about yourself. Yeah, I would argue that that would be correct. Yeah.
But you will be less attached to people and you will be less dependent on them.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you are autonomous, oh, so hot. You're going to be less attached to your parents? Does that make sense? I'm free to do what I want. So I'm over here in Turkey. My parents are in Chicago and Wisconsin. I'm free of them. So I'm not very attached to them.
I'm not saying you're not attached, but I'm saying that your degree of attachment is much less than someone who's completely dependent on their parents.
Would you guys agree with that?
And this is why we see the difference between individualistic societies and collectivistic societies.
Ooh. So in a society like Turkey, where family is much more important socially, people are less autonomous?
Yes.
I buy that somewhat, but think about when we talked about attachment styles and we talked about like secure attachment versus disorganized attachment. What type of attachment styles will actually lead to autonomy? As a parent, what type of parenting style should you use if you want your kids to be more autonomous? Should you use an authoritarian style, an authoritative style, a neglectful style? If you're really neglectful, then they would have total control over their actions, and I would argue that they wouldn't have a good relationship like you were saying. So they should have a lot of autonomy. Anything else? The neglectful style of parenting can lead to lower self-esteem, which I would argue is not the best thing in the world. It could actually decrease autonomy. How about authoritative versus authoritarian? With authoritative parent, you have a relationship between the parents and the children, right? And the children have some influence. They have some autonomy over what's going on, right? And these children, the authoritative type of parenting should lead to a stronger attachment to the parents than an authoritarian parent, right? Attachment, not in the sense of depending on mom or dad to take care of the problems, but attachment in the sense of the emotional relationship that you feel with them. Okay, so let's talk about autonomy and attributions. So how much control do you have over some outcome? Why did you pass or fail my test? Why did your girlfriend or boyfriend leave you? Why did you come to school today? How much autonomy did you have? What do you attribute these actions to?
Me.
You?
Yes.
So you passed or failed my test because of you. Why? What about you?
I didn't study for that test.
You didn't study for the test. That's why you failed. Why did your girl or boyfriend leave you?
I was cruel to her.
You were cruel to her. Why did you come to school
I
today?
had to.
You had to. Is that something related to you or something related to something else?
No, these are like normal answers. If I would like attribute these, if I would be honest enough to attribute these things to me instead of just saying it's because okay the teacher did not grade my paper correctly, or because my girlfriend is not a nice person.
Yeah, so instead of saying I didn't study, you could say something like, well, my teacher did a bad job grading, or my teacher did a bad job teaching, something like that. So different people attribute outcomes like this to different things. So we've talked about some type of attributions already. In classical conditioning, we talked about attributions, right? So why did the dog salivate? Ring the bell. Ring, ring. Why did the dog salivate? An attribution is basically saying, what's the cause of something, right? He was saying that he was the cause of his girlfriend leaving him because he was cruel. So why did the dog salivate? What's the cause here?
Before the condition or after?
After. So the dog is expecting this food, right? You paired the food with this bell a number of times, and then automatically, because of the classical conditioning, the dog will salivate. We can talk about operant conditioning. So why did the kid throw a tantrum when the parent wouldn't buy them ice cream?
Because they know if they do that they will get that.
Yeah, because previously when they threw a tantrum, their parent didn't want them ice cream. So they know this now. So they know they have autonomy, so they throw a tantrum to get their parents to buy them ice cream. How about the learning performance distinction? So why did Allah fail? Man, he's an idiot. Right? One possibility, or he didn't study. We make causal attributions all the time. So there are different attributional dimensions. What are the three that were in the study guide? The source or the locus. What's another one? Stability. And the final one? Control. Yeah. So we have the locus or source of the causal agent. So what are the different types of sources of the causal agent? I'm thinking more generally. So in one situation I said he failed because he's dumb, right? In another situation I could say he failed because my test was too hard, right? So how do those attributions differ in locus?
Self and the others.
Yeah, we're focusing on who is the cause. Is the cause internal? Is it myself that caused it? Or is it external? So if I say he failed my test because I'm a bad teacher, that's an internal attribution for me. If he attributed it to my bad teaching, that would be an external attribution for him. Does that make sense? Similarly, if I think he's dumb or he thinks he's dumb, that's an external attribution for me. It would be an internal attribution for himself. How about stability?
Does it change?
Yeah, so does it change or not? So if something is stable, that means it's not changing. If something is unstable, that means that it's changing. What type of causal attribution would be a stable attribution? Why did he fail? What's a stable attribution for his failure?
Brain capacity.
Yeah, brain capacity. He has a really low brain capacity, right? That's in external, but also stable attribution. His brain capacity is low. What's an unstable attribution? He's studied. He can choose to study more or less, right? Does that make sense? Okay, how about controllability? What does this have to do with? It should be easy. Control.
Can I manipulate? Can I?
Yeah, it comes down to whether or not you have control of the situation, right? So if the situation is controllable, that means that I can affect it. If it's uncontrollable, I can't affect it. So if he has really low brain capacity, is this something that I can affect? I can't do anything about his brain capacity. Is there anything that I could affect? I mean, it's external to me, right? Can I affect anything about him?
Encouragement.
I can encourage him, right? I can try to improve his self-esteem. Make sense? So, why did people fail? They say I was sick. I missed the test because I was sick. Other people might say, I'm just dumb. I don't understand physics. I'm dumb. Or, I didn't study. Or, I don't study. I was unlucky. The teacher can't teach. This one I've heard a lot. I remember saying stuff like this when I was a student all the time. Man, their teacher, they just suck. They don't teach anything. And then they test you stuff on things they didn't even teach. The test is really hard, or other things too. So where do these things fall on the dimensions of locus, stability, and controllability? So if you say, I failed, I was sick. Is this internal or external? Internal? I would say internal, although you could possibly think about this externally, right? There was a virus. Okay. How about stability? Unstable. How about controllability? Not very controllable, right? We talked about how, what did I say? Like stress, by appraising stressful situations better, you can find things less stressful, and you should boost your immune system. So there's some control, but really not very much. How about I'm stupid? Internal or external? Internal. Stable or unstable? Stable. Controllable or not? Not controllable. I I'm stupid, I have stupid genes, that's all there is to it. I'll always be dumb, sorry. I didn't study.
Internal.
Internal? Stable or not?
No.
Not stable. Controllable or not?
Yes.
Controllable. Good. How about I don't study?
Internal.
Internal?
Stable.
Yeah, I would say that's stable, right? It's not something like, oh, I didn't study it this time. It's a matter of fact, like, this is just something I don't do. Is this controllable or not?
Of course.
I would argue that it's controllable. How about lucky? I was unlucky. Internal or external?
External.
External. Stable or not?
Not stable.
Unstable. Controllable or not?
No. Not
Uncontrollable. The teacher can't teach.
external.
External.
Stable.
Stable. Uncontrollable. If that's the case, you guys are screwed. The test was really hard. External.
Unstable.
Unstable. Good. Uncontrollable. All right, what's the fundamental attribution error? These are different ways of attributing things, right? I'm attributing his failure to his luck, to his sickness, to his stupidity, right? What is the fundamental attribution error? If I make this when he fails my test, why do I say he failed my test?
Because he's dumb.
Because he's
Dumb.
Because he's dumb. Is that right? How many people agree with that?
Yeah.
1, 2 people raise their hand. How many people disagree with that?
No, you mean as a fundamental attribution error?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the fundamental attribution error. So the fundamental attribution error is when we attribute the things that happen to others, not to ourselves, but to others. We tend to ignore the situation and attribute behaviors to personal characteristics. So I say, he's stupid. Right? If I make the fundamental attribution error, he very well could be stupid. But there could be a lot of things that I'm not taking into consideration. So I have witnessed a ton of accidents here in Turkey since I walk to and from school every day. I have this half-an-hour walk, and I see accidents. If I make the fundamental attribution error, why did the people make the accidents?
Turks are not that drivers.
Yeah, those Turks, they can't drive, right? Why else might there be accidents?
They were careless when driving.
They were careless while driving. That's pretty close to the fundamental attribution error. There are a lot of cars, there's a lot of traffic, right? So I can think about the situation. There's a ton of traffic, a ton of cars. If there's a lot more cars than I'm used to, there should be a lot more accidents. There aren't going to be any accidents if there are no cars around, right? So the situation plays something in the role. So a student who failed several classes, I would say, if they were making the fundamental attribution error, they would say things like their teachers, all my teachers are jerks. Have you guys heard people say things like that? Oh man, they're just out to get me. Mom, I did bad on my grade report card, but it's not me. I did everything. They just don't like me. That's a fundamental attribution error. A teacher with only failing students, they fail because they're stupid. If all of your students are failing, I would guess the problem is probably internal, not something external. Okay, how about self-serving bias? This is different from the fundamental attribution error.
Protect the ego.
Yeah, this is all about protecting your ego, protecting your own self-esteem. So this concerns events that happen to us. So if something good happens, I got a raise. Woohoo! You passed your test. Why?
Good.
I'm a great teacher, man. I got a raise because I'm a freaking amazing teacher. Post my videos on YouTube. I do good research. Right? Internal attributions. I worked hard. I'm smart. Right? These are things that we attribute to us. However, if bad things happen, if we're demonstrating self-serving bias, why did things happen?
Others.
External things, right? So imagine that you get a speeding ticket. I don't know if they actually give out speeding tickets in Turkey or not. Has anyone gotten one?
Yes.
Wow. I've gotten plenty over my lifetime. So if you get a speeding ticket, why did you get it? You could say things like, well, you know, I got a speeding ticket because I was driving over the speed limit. But some people say other things, like, oh man, the cop doesn't like...
Cars from other towns.
Yeah, that was a big one. So if you went to Wisconsin for vacation, I'm from Illinois and Wisconsin is just north of us. A lot of people go up there on the weekends to go swimming or fishing or whatever. And there was this stereotype that the Wisconsin police would really pull over foreign state plates. Oh, you're from Illinois? So if you sped past the cop and you had a Wisconsin plate, you wouldn't care. But you have an Illinois plate, you're screwed. The cop doesn't like people from Illinois. Or maybe something else, right? So I'm busy driving and I'm not paying attention to the driving. Instead, I'm talking to my wife about something. And when the cop comes over, I say, oh, look, I'm really sorry. You know, please let me go. I wasn't trying to speed. My wife was talking to me. It's her fault, right? So what's good about this self-serving bias? What did you say it was for? That wasn't you? You?
She said ego.
Ego. What about the ego? What does self-serving bias do? Protects the ego, right? So it helps you maintain self-esteem. I did something good, I'm a good person. I did something bad, crap, I was unlucky, right? What's bad about this? I mean, we all want high self-esteem, right? So how could this be bad?
It doesn't solve the problem.
In some cases, it won't solve the problem, right? If I'm constantly attributing my failure on the tests to bad teachers, then how am I going to get any better? I'm not, right? If instead I blame it on my lack of studying, can I improve? Think about the controllability. I have bad teachers. Can you control that?
No.
You can't control your teachers. So if you fail the test because of bad teachers, you're not going to be able to do anything different, right? Or maybe you could, but you won't realize it. If, however, you blame it on not studying, do you have control over that?
Yes.
Absolutely. So the bad thing is that self-serving bias can actually reduce self-efficacy and produce helplessness. So what's self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is basically one's beliefs they are capable of producing some outcome. They have control. There's a weird thing in teaching. So sometimes you have students that create disturbances. And as a teacher, especially as a young teacher, it's the first class you're teaching, you kind of identify with the students and you realize that I don't really have much power. What if the student doesn't leave the classroom when I ask them to? I can't spank them. What can I do? Right? So how much control do I have? So often new teachers don't realize that they have a lot of self-efficacy. So what happens if you have no control over your situation? If you can't control whether you pass or fail my tests, what happens? When I was in undergrad, I took this class, neuroanatomy and physiology something. It was brutal. Have I told you guys this before? So I was one of the best students in the class, and I would get a 40 out of 100 on almost every exam. And it would be marked F. And I would study like crazy for these tests. Like other classes, I would study a little bit, but this class, I would study for days and days before the test. And I would get Fs every single time. And at the end of the semester, the teacher, thank goodness she curved it, and I ended up with an A. Anyway, I thought that this was really sort of cool because it taught me that even though I performed, really high compared to the other students, that I really didn't understand everything. This was a very humbling experience and taught me that, wow, there's so much more to be learned. So in the first classes that I taught as a teacher, I thought I would use the same strategy. So I made my intro psych tests brutally, brutally hard, where almost everyone was failing. So you don't study at all, you fail. You study a ton, you fail. And I would tell the students, don't worry guys, I'll curve it at the end of the semester, no big deal. But they would see that their studying didn't matter. So what happened? What do you guys think happened?
They gave up studying.
Yeah. Like, people stopped coming to class. They wouldn't come to class. They stopped studying. And then people, like, really started failing, where they were doing really, really poorly. When this happens, people become depressed. They resign from the situation. Forget it. There's nothing I can do in this class. I'm going to fail, so I might as well not even try. Right? They develop apathy or helplessness. So what happens as a result of this? Learned helplessness can happen. So what's learned helplessness?
Perceiving no control.
If you perceive no control, so if there are repeated bad events and you see that you don't have control over those events, that's helplessness, right? What's the learned component of helplessness?
Reward.
Can I read words? Sure. So imagine that you failed all of your classes last year. Each class had a different instructor, right? And no matter what you did in those classes, whether you studied hard or didn't study at all, you failed. So you were helpless in those classes, right? It didn't matter. So now you're in my class, where studying actually matters. But if you have learned helplessness, what will you do?
You develop a generalization.
Yes, you develop a generalization in what? How will you study for my class? You would study less in my class. Does everyone buy that? That's exactly right. If he has learned that what he does in all of the other courses he's taken up to this point doesn't matter what he does, then when he gets into my class, if he generalizes what he has learned, then he'll say, it's not going to matter whether I study in this class either, right? So he'll feel helpless in this class, even though studying might have an influence. So with an experiment, psychologists looked at this, and they took 3 animals, 3 dogs, and they randomly assigned them to 3 groups. They had a control group. So the control group, they were put in this cage, they were put in a harness where they were basically stuck in one position, and they could move around a little bit, but they couldn't get out. So that's the control group. Then you have the escape group. The escape group, they're in the same cage, they're in the same harness, they can do everything that the control group does. Now, this group, they get shocked. So all of a sudden, a shock comes on. And maybe a light comes on before the shock. So we're going to do some operant conditioning so they'll learn that when the light comes on, if they make the operant response, they can get out, right? So, what happens? Well, the dog doesn't like being shocked, so what's the dog going to try to do? It's going to try to get out, right? So scratch on the walls, and eventually, boom, it's going to hit the right thing to make the shock stop, right? Boom. Oh, thank goodness. Now it's going to get shocked again, right? What's it going to do? If it's learned anything, it will hit that lever faster. So you do this a bunch of times till it learns, aha, I can actually turn off the shock before it even happens, potentially. Now, the final group is the yoked group. What is a yoke? Yokes are used in agriculture, in farming. You want to plow a field? What do? Get 2 oxen. No one knows how to plow a field? So you get 2 oxen and you bind them together. You stick this thing where they're basically attached to one another. And they have to work as a team, right? They need to both go the same way. So what you do basically is you give this dog the exact same experience as this one. You don't give it any control though. So it's stuck in this chamber, and it gets shocked, and it starts to behave, and scratching, but it doesn't matter if they hit this. They don't have any control. They're helpless. Does that make sense? So you shock it. Whenever this one got shocked, this one gets shocked. And as soon as the shock stops for this one, it stops for that one. So they're both getting the same amount of shock. They're both in the same harness, in the same cage, everything, right? Now what happens? Interestingly, afterwards, you put all of the animals into a new cage. So here's an example of a cage. Notice there's like this gate between both sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on a light or make a sound, and then after the light or the sound comes on, we're going to shock the floor of whatever side it's on. And we're going to keep shocking the dog until they jump through. And once they jump through, then the shock stops. Does that make sense? So now the question is, how quickly do the different animals learn that they have control over this situation? In this situation, everyone has the same control. It doesn't matter if you were in the control group, whether you're in the escape group or the shock group, or the yoked group. Everyone, when they make this jump, the shock will stop. So how quickly do they learn this? The escape group will learn more quickly than what? Than the control group or than the yoke group? Yeah. Interestingly, the escape and control learn equally fast, but the yoke learns slower, if at all. So sometimes the animals that didn't have any control over being shocked in the previous experiment, they'll act really, really pathetically. So they'll start getting shocked, and they'll just show resignation. They'll curl up and like, dude, come on, just jump, you can do it. But a lot of them never learn. Why? Well, it's because they made this generalization. They were helpless in one situation, and they overgeneralized about their own self-efficacy. So they acted as if they were helpless in a new situation in which they had control. So I said self-serving bias could produce helplessness. How could that be? So we have some negative event. How do we attribute the negative event if we have self-serving bias?
Blame the effects.
We blame the effects on
Others, external factors.
external factors, right? If we're blaming the effects on external factors, how much self-efficacy do we have? Very little. Very little. It means basically we're helpless, right? If we generalize this, then we would become helpless in situations where we really aren't helpless at all. So Ellis came up with this ABC adversity model. So the whole idea is that there are bad situations, there are adversities that people come across, right? Negative events. And people have different beliefs about why these negative events occurred. These are basically attributions, right? This negative event happened because I was unlucky. The negative event happened because I didn't study hard. The negative event happened because I was cruel, right? And based on your attributions of these negative events, they have consequences, which determine how you behave. So if you are attributing some things in different ways, if you attribute your failure on an exam to not studying, then you can be determined, right, to study harder on the future test. However, if you feel that it's because you have a mean teacher who doesn't teach you anything and just gives brutally hard exams, this can make you angry, right? So, different people have different beliefs. There are optimists and pessimists. So how do optimists attribute bad events? Bad events happen because
It must be
worse than what?
this bacteria.
So if you're an optimist, what is an optimist?
Seeing the
Someone who sees the good side in everything, right? So my coffee cup, if I'm an optimist, it's half full. I still have a lot of coffee that I can drink. If I'm a pessimist, it's half empty, right? So an optimist, when attributing a bad event, what type of attributions are they making?
Maybe it's a way for us to learn.
I would argue that the attributions that you're making is affecting your learning, right? That's where the consequences come in, right? So your beliefs affect the consequences. It would affect what you learn. So optimists, when they have bad events, they often attribute these to to temporary external causes, or maybe causes that they can control. That would help them learn even better, right? I failed because I didn't study. It's something temporary that I can change, right? Pessimists, how would they attribute things? I can't control it. They would look at these potentially with permanent causes, something that you couldn't control. And often also internal, if you're really pessimistic, right? It's not just that, well, I'm always unlucky, but I'm stupid. Good events, how would optimists attribute good events? I got a raise, woo! Why? I'm an optimist. Internal, right? Man, I got a raise, I'm smart, I'm a hard worker, woohoo! So often permanent internal causes. I'm smart, I'm a hard worker. It's not saying, well, I worked hard. It's saying I'm a hard worker, which is something much more permanent than I worked hard. How about good events for pessimists? Temporary external causes. Oh man, jeez. I don't know how I got that raise. I'm glad I did, but helplessness. When optimists experience helplessness, it's often limited to specific areas. So there are some things that I'm helpless about. For the people that we were talking about earlier, about when losing hope is a good thing, so chronic sufferers of some disease, like they're helpless. They can't do anything about it. But an optimist would view this as just limited to a specific area. So yeah, I'm sick, I can't do anything about that, but I do have control over my relationships with other people. I do have control over whether or not I finish my college degree, even though I might die a couple years later, right? So the helplessness is something that's limited to specific areas, whereas pessimists, helplessness is, yeah, it's less limited, or it's, I'm sorry, yeah, less limited. It's pervasive, meaning that basically it applies to lots of things. Self-efficacy, people that are optimists view pervasive self-efficacy. I have a lot of control over my teaching. I have a lot of control over your learning. I have a lot of control over my children's behavior, versus the self-efficacy of a pessimist, which would be, you know, I have control over maybe a couple things, not very much. So optimism is something that can be really, really valuable. It can help you learn a lot. So how could we learn to be optimistic? How can you learn to view this as a third full rather than 2/3 empty? Huh? You can try to look at things from the positive side. You can dispute pessimistic beliefs. You can question your attributions and the consequences of them. So a lot of the attributions we make automatically. We don't have to think about, why did I fail that last exam? It's immediately apparent to a lot of us, right? Oh, I failed because that teacher's a jerk. I failed because I didn't study. We can question this. Is the teacher really a jerk? Is the teacher really just out to get you? How likely is this? Is that a likely thing that the teacher, they're not busy enough doing their teaching and their research, like they have enough time to hold a grudge against you and go after you? That's an unrealistic belief. So you can question that. Well, if you failed and it didn't have to do because the teacher's a jerk, what might have the cause been? Well, it might have been that you didn't study as much, which can be optimistic because you have control over whether or not you study. So the idea is by disputing the pessimistic beliefs and coming up with different attributions that are more positive, you can energize yourself with the newfound, more positive consequences. This kills me. Because the energized thing, it sounds so like, yay, just be happy. Change your attributions and be happy. It's so pop psyche. But the idea is solid. Think about operant conditioning. If you change your attribution into a way that's more positive, and then you reward yourself somehow, tell yourself, wow, good job. What should this increase your likelihood of doing? So I used to think that I was a bad student and I failed because, I was dumb. But then I questioned, I disputed these beliefs, and I thought, well, maybe it's not that I'm dumb, maybe I'm just not studying correctly. So I'll go talk to my teacher and ask what I could do differently, right? Now, how do I feel about things? I can control. So if I'm going to energize, what can I do? Say, yeah, I'm going to do better now. Okay, teacher, what am I going to do? Okay, I'll study this way. Yeah, good job. Oh, that's smart thinking. And you're giving yourself this positive feedback, right? Which should lead you to do what in the future?
Get better grades, probably.
Not just get better grades. That would be an outcome if you actually follow through, but there should be something else. What led you to have these pat yourself on the bad experiences? Fail. Oh, I failed. I didn't get the point across that I wanted to. Why didn't I do this? I'm just a bad teacher. No. So with operant conditioning, right, you do something, you make an operant response, and then it produces some outcome. So what I'm saying is you dispute your pessimistic beliefs, right? And then basically you reward yourself for disputing them, which should increase the likelihood that you dispute them in the future, which will make it more likely that you will, continue disputing them and finding more positive attributions. So through repetition, these optimistic attributions can become learned. And hopefully automatic. Lots of things that you practice that you do over and over and over again become automatic. So when this has happened, boom, you're automatically an optimist. So Ellis's adversity model has been amended. Instead of just the ABCs, now we can say ABCDE. Interestingly, students that were taught these ideas about how your attributions have consequences and how by questioning your attributions you can learn more and be better, the students that were taught this ended up suffering less depression and less anxiety than the students who weren't. Okay, so this is good news. If you can become more optimistic, there are good things in store for you. What does Broaden and Build say will be in store for you if you're more optimistic? There are two components. There's Broaden, thank you, and Build. If you become an optimist, then what? If you become an optimist, you can improve things. You can build off of that, but how? So this broaden part is that positive emotions broaden horizons. Think back to children with the different attachment styles with their parents, right? So the ones who were securely attached, what did they do when their parents were around? Kids with the secure attachment would do, they would go and explore. Right? And if you're exploring, what can you do? You can learn. That's exactly right. So if you feel good, if you feel secure, if you feel like you're in control of things, because the securely attached child knows that if it cries, its mom will come, right? So if you have these things, then you can learn more. You'll have increased awareness, increased creativity, increased exploration. And these increases allow individuals to learn and build themselves to increase their social networks. If I'm exploring more, I'll have the opportunity to bump into more people. If I'm exploring more, I'll learn how to do things maybe that I wouldn't have done otherwise. This can also increase physical health. What's the undoing effect?
If there is like an adverse situation, by applying this kind of positive psychology, you're more likely to feel better.
Yeah, and this will undo the effects of what? Okay.
Creativity.
External things, I'm looking for something more. What did we say lowered the immune system? Stress. Yeah. So the whole idea is that by having much more positive experiences and more feelings of self-control, this should reduce your stress and should allow you to undo negative effects that stress and prolonged exposure to cortisol. Yeah.
In Arabic, I was just asking about the Broaden and Build. In Arabic, we have a saying, I'm not sure how to translate it, but it goes like this. The need is the mother of invention, meaning that...
Yeah. We have the same thing in English. Need is the mother of invention.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that a positive emotion can make you more creative, right? But when you are in need, actually, you're not very happy. And on the other way, if people are happy and satisfied, they will not really look for new ideas because they have everything.
Okay. So let's think about this. So he says if you're happy, you really don't have any needs that need dealt with. And I would argue that based on when are talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at least when it comes up to the deficiency needs, yeah, if we have all those met, maybe we're going to be happy and maybe we don't need to do anything. So maybe let's not just talk about being happy here, but other things. So if you have a need, so there are other things besides happiness that positive psychology is interested in. One is autonomy, right? If you feel autonomous, if you have self-efficacy and there's this need, there's this problem, you're hungry and you need to fix this, and you feel that you can do things, that you have control over things, are you going to be more or less likely to address that need than someone who feels that they don't have control? Does that make sense? So the person who feels more self-efficacy, more autonomy, should be more likely to come up with creative solutions and new skills to solve the needs that they have, even though they might not be happy at the time that they have the need. Does that make sense? All right, you can check these out. Next class we'll talk about intelligence. We should have a research participation group coming in within the next couple minutes. So if you can stick around if you don't have class, it would really be great if you stayed for that. See you in a second.